Hi, I'm Marty.
And I'm Beth, and we are coming to you from the Emil Bueller Conservation Laboratory at the National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia.
In front of us is the spacesuit that Neil Armstrong wore when he made those first steps on the moon.
We are going to be joined by some middle school students who have been learning about the moon landing, but don't know that they're going to see the suit.
We're also going to be joined by the lead conservator and one of the curators who are in charge of this suit, making sure that you can see it for generations to come.
Today we're going to be looking at the science behind preservation and conservation with one of America's treasures. This is STEM in 30.
What do you guys think?
Welcome to the Conservation Lab, everybody.
Everyone, I want to introduce you to Lisa Young, who is our lead conservator, and Kathy Lewis, who is a curator in the Space History Division. They're going to tell you all about this, and we're going to start with, what is it?
This is Neil Armstrong's spacesuit. This is the first human-worn object that stepped foot on the surface of another world. It is almost 50 years old. Actually, the suit itself is about 50 years old, give or take a few parts in here, but it's almost 50 years old, and we are working to preserve it and digitize it, and we're going to put it back on display at the Air and Space Museum this July. And Lisa can tell you what we're doing to preserve the suit so it'll last for another 50 years.
So my primary goal as a conservator in the lab, and I don't know if many of you have met conservators before, but we work really closely with curators in the collection, and our job is to make sure that they do last for future generations. So when you come visit the National Air and Space Museum 30 years from now, you're going to still enjoy Neil Armstrong's spacesuit on display. The first thing you might notice is all the different colors on the suit, all the different materials. Conservators do a lot of conservation science, so we have to know what all the materials are that something's made out of and what in our environment is going to cause that to either be preserved for the future or not be preserved, and it could deteriorate some. The other thing that we look at closely on objects that were worn in space is what damage you see to the suit or changes that could have been impacted by the actual mission. So we really don't want to make those changes to the suit because that's part of the suit's history. So you might notice this dark color over here, which is the lunar dust from the moon's surface. We would not remove that from the suit. It's really important for people to have that evidence on our artifacts moving forward and keep that with the history of the suit.
What were some of the challenges in working on the suit?
The biggest challenge in preserving a spacesuit is that it's made up of many materials that you cannot see. So inside this outer layer, this white outer cloth that protected the astronaut, there's 24 different layers of materials, keeping the astronaut warm, keeping the astronaut cold, protecting them from meteorites, protecting them from radiation on the lunar surface. So all of those layers that were designed to enable the astronaut to live and work in the suit on the moon are stuff we can't see with our eyes. So how am I supposed to take care of the suit if I can't see them? We do x-rays of the suit materials, we do CAT scanning now. With all this new technology and imaging, we're able to look down through the layers of the suit, and we're developing a 3D model, so you all also will be able to see that in the new display. And we're going to think about the challenges of preserving those materials. Okay, I want to show you guys something else we have in the lab today. We have another spacesuit here that we took off display, and we're working on the conservation. This one was the last suit on the moon. Belonged to Gene Cernan from Apollo 17. And what do you see first that's different between this suit and Neil Armstrong's suit? Samantha?
There's a lot more moon dust on it.
You're right. So by Apollo 17, they were so comfortable with their place on the moon and the work they could do, they stayed out 3 times longer than some of the original astronauts, and they played in the dust a lot more. So when we got this suit back from NASA, because it was one of the last suits on the moon, well, it is the last suit that was on the moon, they didn't do as much cleaning up of the surfaces or looking at the surfaces for information that they could use in the next mission, since it was the last mission. So they left all of this lunar dust intact.
This suit looks a lot different than Armstrong's suit. Besides just the dust, what's going on here?
Well, one thing that the Apollo mission controllers realized when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on the surface of the moon is that they couldn't tell one from the other. And it could be very confusing. You have 2 guys in a very high contrast black and white environment in these white suits. You can't tell one from the other. So one decision was made was to put commander stripes on the mission commander's suit. And these are these plastic stripes around the arms and the legs, so they would always know who they were focusing on. The other thing is the configuration of the suit was changed. In order for the astronauts to sit in the lunar rover, they had to reroute the zipper that sealed the suit. And the other configuration change was the rearrangement of the connectors on the chest. They found through trial and error, actually working on the moon, that the configuration that Neil Armstrong had wasn't as comfortable. They moved the connectors around so the astronauts could reach them with more ease.
While there were people walking on the moon, for the first moonwalk, it was Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. However, there was a third astronaut. The loneliest man alive at one point was Michael Collins, and he was circling the moon in the spacecraft that would bring Buzz and Neil back to Earth.
We had a chance to talk to Michael Collins about his role as an astronaut, as well as his role at the National Air and Space Museum, and why the museum is so important in keeping the legacy of Apollo alive.
My coming into being an astronaut was sort of a stair-step program. I had an opportunity to go to West Point, which was a free education, and that was a very important consideration. And then when I graduated, I drifted over into the Air Force, became a pilot. One thing led to another. I was a test pilot at Edwards, and that at that time was a good entry point to the astronaut program. You know, you bring to a flight 30 years of living on this dinky little planet, and whatever you've been able to put together and try to retain, all that I think goes into the preparation for a flight.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And when Neil Armstrong stepped out onto the surface of the moon, that I think was kind of the peak of the interest that the American public had. Buildings like this do a lot to sustain that level of interest, and that's one of the things that I think is very important about this beautiful surrounding, the National Air and Space Museum, which is a vital part of the Smithsonian institution.
The exploration of space will go
One of
ahead.
the really nice things about Apollo was its objective was very clear. President
this nation should commit itself
Kennedy had said,
achieving the
put a
goal
man on the moon by the
before
end of
this
the
decade is
decade.
out.
I came to Washington sneaking up on 1976, and I used to run around town saying, museum on the mall by the bicentennial. Now, take those 3 important facets of Apollo and try to transfer them to the construction of this building. And it worked out well. We were supposed to open July 4th, 1976, and we actually beat it by 3 days, July 1st, 1976. My name is Mike Collins, retired for many years now, but back in '76 I was the director of this magnificent Air and Space Museum.
We've moved out of the conservation lab onto the floor of the museum, and we are standing in front of yet another spacesuit. Kathy, do you want to tell us a little bit about this suit?
This suit is Jim Irwin's suit. He was the lunar module pilot for Apollo 15. And if you look at the suit closely, it looks a little bit more like Gene Cernan's suit than Neil Armstrong's. It was one of the first suits to use the lunar rover, so the astronauts had to sit, and I explained that they redesigned the suit to fit the rover. So his suit has that radial zipper that goes down the side. The major difference that you'll see between his and Gene Cernan's is that he doesn't have commander stripes. He wasn't a commander, he was the lunar module pilot. So he was the second man to step foot onto the surface of the moon for the Apollo 15 mission.
And Lisa, we've got some dirt and some magnifying glasses and some gloves here. What does that have to do with a spacesuit that walked on the moon?
So on many of the suits that came back from the moon, you're going to see dirt on the surfaces, the lunar dust. And the lunar dust is made up of different particles, just like soil is. And if you've studied soil in science, you know there can be different minerals in that material. And so the lunar dust happens to be made up of 6 different types of minerals that are very sharp and angular. So they embed themselves into the spacesuit material, and we can't get the lunar dust to come out. So even though it looks like it's on the surface and it's going to fall right off, it's really just embedded into those suit materials. You're going to see how even though if you get dust embedded into your materials or fabrics, that it is difficult to get it off, and what that looks like under the microscope.
All right, so a couple of you have gloves. Go ahead and put those gloves on. And what we want you to do is we want you to reach in and dig down into that dirt and really get some of that dirt embedded into the fibers of those gloves. So go ahead and reach in there, get a little dirty. Really squeeze it around. Act like you're picking up a moon rock. All right, now kind of shake the dust off of it a little bit, and then take a look at it with your friends there and look at what we're seeing. All right, so what are we seeing?
I can tell that it has gotten in between the fabric strands.
Yeah?
It's really embedded in there. Like turns the fabrics black.
Did it? Yeah?
Yeah, so it stains the surfaces a little bit. So if you rub like 2 of your fingers together and really get it into the fabric, you'll see that it works its way right into those fibers, and it's really difficult to then get out.
So as a conservator, playing in the dirt is actually a really good thing to learn about how stuff gets into fabrics.
Right, and then actually, once we play in the dirt, we actually use different types of cleaning methods. Can you think of something that we could use to clean the dirt off your gloves?
Wash it with soap.
Okay, but what if the soap was really harmful to your artifact and you couldn't use any soap? What would you use?
Vacuum?
Right, so some of the dry methods we use. So we want to lift the dirt off without rubbing it. So when you rub something with soap or water, sometimes that doesn't always work with artifacts because you want to pull the dirt off of the surface instead of working it back in. But the one thing we like to do is test. So we're going to do exactly what you do when we come to an artifact. We're going to dirty something. We're going to mock up something that's similar to what we have in our lab, because the first thing you want to do when you clean a spacesuit is not have it be Neil Armstrong's spacesuit, because if you mess up, you're going to be in really big trouble. So we got to make an experiment, and then we're going to work different ways to clean off that dirt till we find the one that's the safest for our artifact.
So we've looked at Neil Armstrong's suit, and we have heard from Michael Collins, but there was one more person, right, Marty?
Absolutely. Buzz Aldrin was the second person to walk on the moon, and one of the most iconic images of that moonwalk is of Buzz Aldrin. We talked to one of our curators to learn the story behind that iconic image.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lavasser, a curator here at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, and today I'm going to be talking about the very famous Moon Man image of Buzz Aldrin on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. So one of the first things that you can notice here, of course, is the backpack. This is the life support system for the astronauts on the moon. It's critical to everything that they do. It carries all of their water, their air, so that they could stay alive on the moon. Of course, one of the most famous things about this image is the reflection. Here you can see Neil Armstrong reflected. He's the photographer, and you can also see right next to him Buzz Aldrin's shadow. So these are really important features, but it really shows us not only the photographer, but the fact that there were 2 people on the moon. It sounded crazy that we could send people to the moon, and so to see 2 of them in this actual space makes this image and this reflection in the visor really important. Another part that you can see is the lunar module. So this is the vehicle that they went to the moon in. This image is described as a spontaneous image. To turn yourself around on the moon took quite a bit of effort, and you needed to use even your arms to get enough momentum. So here you can see that Aldrin is actually still moving his arm from when he had to turn from facing away from Armstrong to facing him. The other thing that indicates movement is a strap. Here you can see that he was actually quite a bit in motion. Another thing that you might want to notice about an image like this is the fact that this is the only way that you could tell which astronaut this is. This is his name tag. And of course it clearly states that that is Edwin Aldrin, Buzz Aldrin of the Apollo 11 mission. Another important feature of these is this little crosshair, and you see quite a few of them all around the image. These are marks that help tell distance. You can also see quite a bit of lunar dust here on the knees of Aldrin. It was very difficult to walk in the spacesuits. Of course, this is the first time these suits had been used on the moon, and they were used to do what we see here, which are boot prints. So this is the real evidence, even today, that lasts on the moon of human presence. These boot prints made by the Apollo 11 astronauts and all the way up through the Apollo 17 mission will be undisturbed basically unless humans or other things go and disturb them. This down here is a contact sensor. So this is underneath the pad of basically the feet of the lunar module, and this is the little sensor that actually triggered an alarm or a monitor inside the lunar module when the astronauts had made contact with the moon's surface. It wasn't understood necessarily how the lunar module would react to landing on the surface, and so the fact that this sensor actually bent up shows that the lunar surface is actually quite solid. We have things like rocks, which are obviously super important. The very first job the astronauts had to do was to collect samples. Strangely enough, it's documented in the mission transcripts that Neil Armstrong actually kind of ignored that rule, did not collect his contingency sample right away. The first thing he decided to do was to take pictures. And he started taking pictures as soon as he made that first step, so that he would have some kind of evidence for everyone to be able to see that this was what had happened, this is what they had done. Up in the visor here, you can not only see the American flag, but you can see science experiments that have been put out by the astronauts. So in looking at this image and analyzing it and analyzing any image, a strategy to take, and what I was trained to do, is to really read it just like you would read a page in a book. You read it left to right, top to bottom, and it really allows you to analyze every single bit of the image for information you might not otherwise get from just glancing at an image or even reading text. There's lots of ways to interpret images, but there are symbols within these images that help us understand and get a deeper understanding of the events depicted in the image.
As you've seen, we've got some incredibly bright students with us today. But have you ever noticed that museums are kind of dark?
They're dark because light will damage objects. In much of the same way it'll burn your skin, light over a long period of time will damage the objects that we have here in the museum.
And so we make the cases a little bit darker than the areas around you in the museum. So you can see the objects still while you're in the galleries, but your eyes adjust and then we lower the light levels. With spacesuits, because they're very bright white, we don't have to put much light on them in the museum because they will show up very nicely, which is a benefit to our collection. But we use these little light meters, and we can go around and take readings of the actual light levels, and we record that, and we calculate that over time using a math formula. Then we can tell how long where it's safe to leave our objects on display, and if we have to lower the light, or we can increase the light over time.
And we did an experiment with just a piece of construction paper, put a little piece of cardboard over it, and I taped it into a window for a couple of weeks, and the light really changed. Xavier, do you want to peel yours off and show everybody? This is you can see where it was purple to begin with. The sun hit around that triangle. You can really see how it damaged the paper.
But we're going to have you all create a little demo that you can take home tonight and put in your house and see if there's light coming in that could potentially fade posters or pictures you have on your walls.
So you guys have got some construction paper in front of you. You want to cut it into like a couple of squares and then cut out whatever shape suits your fancy and tape it onto the square that you've cut, and then you can take it home and put it in your window and wait a few weeks and you can see the color change.
All right, why don't you guys go ahead and make your light viewers there. And teachers, as you take down your bulletin boards for the year, send us those pictures of the remnants of what was up there so that we can see how light affected your classroom.
What do you think would block the light? What do you think would help your objects from not fading in light besides putting it in the dark? Like what? Right, you could put screening materials over your patch. What else do you put on your eyeballs when you go out into the sun?
Sunglasses.
Right, so those shades and those screening materials are there to keep you from the UV light coming through and penetrating your eyes. And what do you put on your skin when you go to the beach?
Sunscreen.
Right, so we have some conservation materials like I've told you about where we're actually incorporating sunscreen into our coatings for aircraft, for example, on display outside, where that's going to protect it further from these UV damages.
We've talked a lot today about the first trips to the moon. What we haven't talked about are how those trips inspired the next generation of scientists and engineers and astronauts and explorers.
No, I'm growing up during Apollo. Apollo is what I'm watching, what's getting me interested in the space program. I'm in first grade when the principal breaks in one day, stops the class and pulls out the TV set, one of those old black and white TVs with rabbit ears. She goes, "We're about to make history. You need to remember where you were when this happened, so you need to witness this." And we're watching the countdown for Apollo 7, of course, the clock hits 0, and this thing just lifts off and just blasts off into the sky. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was not prepared for that at all. She goes, "That was Apollo 7. It says, we are trying to go to the moon, and this is the very first way. This mission isn't going to the moon, but this is the first step." So 6 months later, I'm watching Apollo 11. I asked my dad, "How much do you have to pay to go put on a spacesuit and walk on the moon?" And he goes, "Well, if you're an astronaut, they pay you. That's your job." And so the whole time there, that was what kind of kept me going, watching the Apollo Soyuz, watching Skylab, and then finally the shuttle program. And so at some point, I'm interviewing to become an astronaut years later, and sitting in the room interviewing with me is John Young, Apollo astronaut, Gemini astronaut, shuttle astronaut, and he also landed the lunar lander, and it was like flying a helicopter. So he says I'm a helicopter, and he's in this detailed technical question and answer with me on, evaluating his landing task for helicopters. I'm answering his questions, and it's fun. I'm just geeking out, but I'm thinking, something to tell your grandkids about. I'm sitting there having a conversation with a man who'd been on the moon about one of the tasks he'd done. They were and still are an inspiration to me to this very day.
We've talked about spacesuits from the Apollo program, but Kathy, what are the spacesuits that go to Mars going to be like?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's a question that people are working on today. There are a lot of people who are looking at different aspects of spacesuits, from gloves, from joints, and one of the many things that they're looking at, they want spacesuits that are reusable, much like the current EVA suit that the astronauts use today, but they're also looking for spacesuits that don't have time limits on them. Now astronauts are limited to the ability for them to flush out carbon dioxide when they're breathing, so they're limited to about 8 hours in the current technology. They're looking for suits that, even though they're going to get dirty, and they are going to get dirty, you're going to have people rolling in the dirt, they don't want to bring that lunar or Martian dirt back into their living habitat. So they're looking at ways to design suits that attach to a mobile environment. So the astronauts can exit the suits through the rear, but the dirt of the suit is still on the outside. So it's sort of like having a mud room built into your habitat on another planet. And there are many more things that people are working on in order to prevent injuries. One of the major causes of injuries to astronauts today are use injuries. They suffer from shoulder injuries and elbow injuries from wearing spacesuits and practicing in neutral buoyancy tanks. And it's very exhausting, and they're getting prone to injuries, so they're looking for new materials in the restraint system so it's not so hard on the joints. And that's especially a concern when you have astronauts walking around on the surface. If your elbow hurts, you can use it a little less. If your knee hurts, that inhibits your ability to explore.
Kathy, when one of our friends takes their first step on Mars, would you like that suit in the collection?
I have dibs in for that first suit everywhere, and everyone who's working on it, all of the contract and prototype suits, and I think my photo has been posted at Johnson Space Center. I'm not allowed to enter with a large suitcase.
Do you guys have more questions? All right, well, let's head back up to the lab and we'll get those questions answered.
Let's go.
Who has more questions?
Has anything surprised you?
We did find some surprises when we were working on the suit. The most surprising thing to me is how fragile the materials actually are. They picked materials in the 1960s that were new for this purpose, and they were only meant to get Neil Armstrong to the moon and back. They were not meant to last for 50 years. So having said that, the overall preservation of our entire suit is in a really good condition. It's stable. There are some small instances where we had surprises. The other thing that surprised both Kathy and I when we were researching the suit and we looked onto the suit materials and saw some repairs is that up to the time of launch, the suit was not flown to the moon in a pristine condition. They actually were testing in the suit, they were trying it on, they were working in it, and they made little repairs to the suit right before they went up to the moon, just 2 weeks before.
All right, go ahead.
Why is this suit so important?
That's a wonderful question. This suit is really important because for thousands of years, humans have thought about exploring the moon. There's been ancient mythology, science fiction, everything you can imagine. And then it just so happened in the 1960s, we had the technologies to actually send humans to space. And this suit is a wonderful example of, it's not just a piece of clothing, it's a piece of machinery. Think of it as a human-shaped spacecraft that allowed Neil Armstrong to make those first steps on the moon. And that is a remarkable point in history, that we were able to cobble together technologies from pretty much all over the world and ideas and strategies about keeping humans alive. And we put them all together in a very short period of time to make this spacesuit and to actually send Neil Armstrong into space, to send him to the moon and bring him back safely. So it's a wonderful monument to our abilities and also a testament to global human interest in exploring the moon.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
We hope you've enjoyed this behind-the-scenes look at the Conservation Lab and Neil Armstrong spacesuit. We'd also like to thank Kickstarter for making this show possible.
In particular, we want to thank Lisa and Kathy for inviting us in here to see all the work that they're doing on preserving these suits. Thanks for watching.
We'd like to give a special thanks to all those Americans who built those spacecraft. The spacesuit and backpack that was our small spacecraft out on the lunar surface. Who did the construction, design, the tests, and put their heart and all their abilities into those crafts. To those people, tonight we give a special thank you. Good night from Apollo 11.